SpyFu highlights new opportunities for search marketers by revealing the advertising secret formula of their most successful competitors. Simply go to spyfu.com and type in the domain of a competitor of yours. You can see all the keywords that they buy on Google, which ones they rank on organically, and how their campaigns have evolved since 2007. Discover how focused they are on SEO and even how much we estimate they're spending in AdWords. You can also type in any keyword and see who's buying it, ranking on it organically, and dig into similar profitable keywords. As you dive further into SpyFu, you can see trends in ad copy, look up past advertisers in a niche, create client reports, see keyword groups, and find backlink ideas. We have extensive tutorial content, an in-house support team, and even a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can do all of this research risk-free. Join the millions of people who have already used SpyFu and gain an edge on the competition.
My name is Alex, me and my team behind this conference, and I'm super excited about that. You know, we've been preparing this event for 3 months, and so today is a really big day for us, and we are going to do live debating. And so please follow us on our Twitter. It's Digital Olympus, and I'll send you a hashtag so you can just join us and having fun with that. As well as we still have our branded t-shirts, the one that I have on mine, I'll show you. That's a pretty cool one. We've been sharing that with our speakers as well. And so we still have a couple, and we want to give away them, so you can join that as well. And our host will tell you how to do that, and we'll be giving it on Twitter as well. And so also, we have a really special offer that I wanted to share with you from our gold sponsor, Curator. They give us 75% discount on their product, and I really love their keyword tool. It's keyword position tracking tool, and so I'll share it as well as this offer in comments. And you know, guys, you should try it definitely. That's an awesome tool, and I'll track my personal website there. So thank you very much for having me for a couple of minutes, and I hope you'll join our conference. And you just still can send me a message on Twitter or just personally, and you know, have fun and have a great day. And thank you very much for Stevie for being our very first presenter. And I know Paul will give a proper intro of Stevie. Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. A bit scary being first, but I should try and share my screen. So let's just check. If you can just confirm that you can see my slides for me, that would be great. Can you see the slides okay?
Yeah, I can see your slides. I'm sorry, guys.
That's all right. I just wanted to check. So always good to just check. Well, good morning, everyone, and I'm really pleased to be here. And yeah, a bit nervy being the first on, but hopefully can share some things which are of interest to you. I'm going to talk this morning in my slot about influencer marketing and outreach, and I really want to share just some of what we've done and some practical tips on how we've tried to build our audience using influencer marketing and our own outreach lists. Just a few words about me first. I'm Steve Rayson. I'm one of the directors and owners of BuzzSumo. For those of you who don't know us, you'll see a few screenshots as we go through, but we're really a content marketing tool. We crawl data from across the web, we put it in a really big database, and we allow you to search it to see what's the most shared content by domain, by topic, who's sharing it, etc. So we're really a data company. I think we put over 1 billion articles into our database every month, so it's a big data, and we try to do the analysis. If I don't cover anything you particularly wanted to cover today, do just ask me questions. My email is there, my Twitter handle is there. I'm really happy to try and answer any questions that I can. So if we don't cover anything today, do please contact me, and I will try to help you. So, and the reason I wanted to talk a bit about influencer marketing today is just because it's worked for us. There are lots of people who are critical of influencer marketing, and I think there are some concerns about what does it mean. I can only say for us, we're a bootstrapped startup. We've been going less than 2 years now in terms of our paid product. We have 220,000 subscribers, but we haven't had the money to pay for advertising, so we've really paid for no advertising at all. We've boosted a few Facebook posts, but that's about it. But really, those 220,000 subscribers have come from us building relationships, I believe, with some of our core influencers. Hopefully people love the product as well, but really the awareness out there has come from us building relationships, I think, with a number of key influencers. So I'll take you through how we've done that, and hopefully there'll be some lessons for you or something, some insights. So I think starting point is really, what is an influencer? What do we mean by an influencer? And for me, in the context of content marketing, an influencer is someone who's got the ability to amplify your content. So it's very precise. I mean, there are lots of different types of influencers, as I will come on to. But I think for me, in the context of our content marketing, it's someone's got the ability to amplify your content, to get it in front of a very specific audience, to get people to engage with that content, to recommend your content. So for me, it's someone who's got that ability to amplify your content. So that's what I would have in mind when I'm thinking about influencers. And just a little bit more evidence that it works. We took a million well-shared posts. So we took a million well-shared posts from our database, and then we had a look at something very specific. We looked at whether the post was shared by somebody we defined as an influencer. Now, the way we defined an influencer was quite simple. We just said an influencer in our terms was somebody who's got a retweet rate of 2 or more. Basically, every time they tweet, they get an average of at least 2 retweets. That may seem quite low, but actually it's quite high. When you start looking at the data, it's reasonably high. So that's how we defined an influencer. And what we could see was that there were some articles which had no shares from an influencer at all. And on average, in our particular sample set of well-shared posts, they got 700 shares. If they were shared by one influencer, one person with a retweet rate of more than 2, they got about 30% more shares, 900 or so. If they were shared by 3 influencers, they actually got double the number of shares on average across a million posts. So they got double the number of shares, about 1,400. And if they got shared by 5, that was really the holy grail. If they got shared by 5, then it was at least 4 times as many shares on average. So I think what we could see is that influence do make a difference. If somebody with an engaged audience shares your content, it's likely to lead to other people viewing it and sharing it, for example. So there are lots of different types of data. This is just one piece of research that we did to look about the impact of influencer amplification. So I think provides some evidence that it matters to you, particularly in a world nowadays where a lot of people discover content via social, via friends, and they trust friends much more than they would trust advertising, for example. They may not even see ads through ad block, etc. So okay, so it's okay to talk about amplification, but what does it mean? I mean, to me, it's quite simple. If you exclude the paid promotion, content is typically amplified by sharing and linking. People may discuss it, etc. But primarily, people will either link to your content, and people might follow that link, or people will share your content, and then they'll find your content that way. They'll see it being shared in their social networks, whether that's on Facebook or LinkedIn, for example. So to me, we're looking at 2 ways in which influencers can help amplify your content. The key question, I suppose, is, well, which influencers? How do I find influencers? And so that's what I wanted to start looking at this morning. So my session now is about really practically, how can you do that? How can you find the right people who can help you in terms of sharing your content and linking to your content? So who are these influencers? Who are these influencers who can help you amplify your content? And I wanted to start by maybe just saying a few words about what an influencer isn't, in my view. So we've got Mr. Popularity here. But my view is an influencer is not, absolutely not, somebody with lots of followers. It may sound counterintuitive, but the number of followers isn't the key factor. As we'll come on to, you need to think about their engagement, the audience that they've got. So if you target someone with lots of followers, I don't think they're the right people, and I'll show you why. The other thing is that if you target someone with lots of followers, lots of other people are probably targeting the same people, and they're probably inundated with requests. So you don't necessarily want to target the people with lots of followers. But the real reason I think they're not necessarily influencers is when you look at their retweet rates. I hope you can see this. It's not too small on your screens. I just took these as an example. I could have taken lots. We've done analysis after analysis looking at numbers of followers and the average retweets that somebody gets. And we can find no relationship between the two. You would expect that someone who's got millions of followers would get more retweets on average than somebody with 10,000 followers. And you would expect that to be the case. Logically, that makes sense. but it's simply not true. Some people have millions of followers who never look at their Twitter feed, or who never share the content, for example, who may have followed them once and are not really that engaged. I just put a couple of examples here, so you can see big differences here. So Joe Pulizzi at the top, 70,000, slightly more now, but 70,000 followers, 4.5 average retweets. Clearly an influencer. In our book, anybody who's getting over 2 would be an influencer. But equally, we can see Susan below him, 6,000 followers, but an average retweet rate of 5.6. And so she's getting much higher rates. And then we see Martin below, very large number of followers, but actually average retweet rate very low. And it could even be that somebody who's only got 20 followers, if they're part of a specialist group and they're really engaged, maybe they could get 10 people to retweet on average what they're doing. So it's not necessarily about the numbers of followers, not necessarily about that. I think you do have to look at how engaged is their audience with them, how often do people engage with their content and retweet their content. So to me, an influencer is somebody who's got an engaged audience, and then specifically in an area that matters to you or your product or service. So you need to find the people who've got engaged audiences, and they've got to matter in your area, really. And I'll come on to how you find these people. But to me, just so you're clear, that's what I'm talking about, is you need an influencer with an engaged audience in an area that matters to you. And importantly, importantly, they've got to be relevant to your area. So hopefully you can see my picture of Ronaldo here. It would be fantastic, wouldn't it, if Ronaldo recommended BuzzSumo. He could have BuzzSumo even on a shirt. That would be great. It might create some awareness. But he's probably not going to lead to many people signing up to use our tool. What's important is the fit. You need the influencer who's got an engaged audience that really matters to your target market. So for us, for example, we do quite a lot of work with people like Mark Schaefer, Lee Oden, for example, Larry Kim. They're people who have much smaller audience than Ronaldo, but will be far more effective to us. So you've got to have fit between you and your particular audience. So, okay, so how do we then look at which influencers amplify that content? There are a number of different people that you can look at, and I think some of these are not always, people don't think about them sometimes. People just think about the people with the big followers, and that's not always the case. But clearly there are celebrities or names in your industry. If you're in content marketing, you will know about Joe Pulizzi. He's typically a big name in the industry. Those sorts of people typically have large followings. So celebrities are there. They are influencers. They're normally in great demand. They've got loads of people mailing them, asking them for tips and quotes and all those sorts of things. And I talked to quite a lot of them, and they're increasingly fed up with people saying, would you contribute a tip to my article? I don't think they're necessarily the top people you go for. I think journalists are very much underrated, really. Journalists, what they have is they have reach through their platform. And so a journalist could be somebody who writes for TechCrunch, could be a journalist on a particular newspaper. They've really got huge reach through the domain that they write for, not necessarily them personally, so you're not necessarily looking at their personal following. They have reach through their domain. And my personal tip is, one way you can really reach out to journalists is I do continual searches for journalist interns. So I look for interns in journalism on big papers, and then I approach them and I try to help them, saying, can I give you any data? Can I be helpful? Can I do any research for you? They're generally not in such demand, and they're generally quite grateful for somebody who's genuinely trying to help them and provide some data, and they may then mention you. And they've still got huge reach. So I think journalists are really quite important because of the domain they write for and the reach that they have. So I think you should look at journalists, and particularly journalist interns, junior journalists in your areas. I think academics and industry analysts are important, but obviously those that have influence in your particular space. You know, in your industry, whatever industry you're in, who are the analysts, who are the academics, who do people respect in that particular space, who do they follow as an analyst? So if you're in, say, software as a service, SaaS, startups and marketing, you might follow Tom Tungus, who's a VC who writes really good stuff around SaaS. But who are the analysts and the people in your particular industry? And another one that I think sometimes can be neglected are peers, just people who are just active in the space, they write in the space, and they're respected by the wider community, even though they may have a very small audience. They might only have 5,000 followers or 10,000 followers or less, but they're respected by the community, so people really respect their views. So I think peers are quite good to look at. So there are different influencer types. I think you need to think about this in terms of, in your influencer marketing strategy, which type of people are you reaching out to? And then I think all you do to start with is simply map your landscape. So think about your target audience. So if you think about that audience, okay, who influences them? Who influences the way they think about the market, decisions they may take? They may follow analysts. They may follow ones that they particularly respect. So you need to look at those. You know, what sites, blogs, and publications do they read? Is it TechCrunch? Is it other sites, for example? You know, are there small niche ones that you could reach? Which ones do they read most often? Which influences them? And which peers contribute and influence the debate? They may not be journalists, they may not be the big celebrities, but are there people who contribute to the debate that have influence? So firstly, just map your landscape so you have a sense of that. And the way to do it, obviously I use BuzzSumo, there are other tools that you can use, but the first thing that I would tend to do is I would go to BuzzSumo, and I should say there is a free, completely free version. You can do as many searches for the most shared content as you like, so it's just free, so do use it if you want to use it. But I would just go in and put in a term, so let's say content marketing, for example. I would find heavily shared content, so I'd find really what's the really top shared content. But then I'd look at, more importantly than that, I'd look at who shared and amplified it. So who amplified that content? So what you can do with BuzzSumo is then do the view sharers. Now currently we're only showing Twitter sharers, but you can see who shared that article on Twitter. So we can see on that one, 20,000 people shared it. Who shared that article? And you can then sort them. I would then sort them by retweet rate and see who are the big people who shared that article. Is it directly relevant to something that I'm writing? So that may be somebody I want to build a relationship with. So I would tend to look at heavily shared content and then find who shared and amplified it. So I can start to build up a potential list that way. I will also find authors of heavily shared content. Some authors do get heavily shared, and it's good to look for those ones. So you can do an author search in BuzzSumo as well. You can do that in a number of ways. You can simply type in author at the top and put a name in. Or when you find an article here by Murray Newlands, if you can see that, just click on the author's name and we will show you all of that author's most shared content. Then you can see if an author writes consistently about a topic that's relevant to you. So however you do it and whatever tool you use, I would say try and find the heavily shared content, see who's writing those articles, and see, more importantly, who's sharing those articles, who's amplifying that content and helping it to go viral or to achieve a wider audience. So they're the first two tasks that I'd look at, is authors and sharers of popular content. You can just search straightforwardly for influencers. So there are many tools you can do this. You can use tools like Follow Wonk, etc. There are lots of different tools, Clear, etc., where you can find influencers. We have a feature within our tool, but as I say, there are a range of tools you use. I don't think it necessarily matters which one you use, but you can search for people who are, are respected as authorities. So if you go to BuzzSumo, for example, or the same is true if you go to Clear or other tools, you type in your topic and it will show you, based on that tool's algorithm, so this is based on our algorithm, of who we think are influential people in that particular topic. And then you can resort that data by numbers of followers, or in my case, I would always sort it by their retweet rates. I want to see who's got the most engaged audience, not who's got the most followers. For me, that's the most important part of things, really. What I would then do is filter them down. So again, you can do this with different tools. In BuzzSumo, we have these categories on the top left. So for example, if I'm searching for journalists, I would just tick the journalist category, and I would just want to see the journalists, and then start to look at adding those to my outreach list. You can also filter by location. That can be helpful, I think, because I'll come on to this, but I think it's really important that you meet influencers personally as well. It can be difficult sometimes, but obviously if there are people in your locality, it's easier to meet them than people not in your locality. So it can be useful sometimes to target specific locations. It could even be that you're running a conference in a particular city and you want to just spot, all the key bloggers in that topic who live in that city, and you want to invite them to your event, for example. It could be something quite simple, or you want to put together a masterclass. So do search is for influencers, and you can use tools from, say, from follower wonk right through, but try to build up a potential list. And all the time, all I'm doing here is building a potential list of people that we would reach out to. So these aren't going to be all of them. I'm starting to put together an initial list of people. Once I've started to build that list, what I then do is do some research and really try to filter down the influencers that I want. So, for example, what are their specific interests? You know, do they have good retweet rates? Do they reply to their users? Are they engaged? And then the other thing I do is view what they share already, because some people, and you know, Joe is fantastic, but as a case in point, over 50% of everything that Joe shares is from the Content Marketing Institute website. So he doesn't share a huge amount from outside. He does, but you know, most of it's generally CMI content. So look at what they share, and again, you can use BuzzSumo or you can use other tools. So here I've just taken SEMrush as an example. These guys don't mind. It's a great tool. I use it, so I can recommend it as a tool. But you know, I can see all the links that they've shared. I can see the topics they share. I can see the sites that they share. So I can see in their case that, you know, at the bottom there, they, you know, about a quarter of the links they share is from SEMrush, but they share then links from lots of other sites, search engine land, business community, but that big blue category is other, so they're sharing lots of other things. So they may well be likely to share my content, and if I look at the topics at the top that they share about, I know they're sharing about SEO, content marketing, social media, etc. So I know they're relevant. So you can find an influencer and check that they're relevant. There's no real point building a relationship with an influencer if they're not really sharing content around your topics, or they don't have an audience engaged around your topic. So do the research to gradually filter down potential people who could be on your influencer list. The other thing is that you've probably got more friends than you think. I'm always surprised that people don't know this, but you know, who shared your content this month on Twitter? So who shared it? Lots of people just don't know, so they're not thanking people, etc. Now, you can do that in a number of ways. Obviously, you can monitor Twitter every day, but that's quite hard to do that, and then you've got to still assume that they've mentioned you to see it necessarily. Some tools like a Google Post, which I can recommend, will show you people linking to your content even if they don't mention you. In BuzzSumo, you can just put in a domain name, you can see the content, and we can show you who shared. We have something called an audience builder. You can put in a domain for any site, or rather put a domain for any site, and we will show you all the people who shared any content from that site in the last month, last week, or the last year. So if I want to go to SEMrush and see everybody who shared a link to SEMrush in their Twitter, I can get a complete list that way. It's useful for tracking competitors and who's sharing competitor content, because maybe they should share my content as well. But more importantly is who's sharing your content. I think you've often got many more friends than you think you have. There are people who already share your content who therefore might be minded to share it again. The same with who linked to you. You can use lots of different link tools, or again in BuzzSumo you can simply type in the domain and we'll show you all the people who've linked to you this week, or the last 2 weeks, for example. You may already have friends, but you also have customers and advocates who probably share your content. You may have partners, people that you run joint webinars with. You may have people you talk to and share things regularly. These are all potential people who can amplify your content, and that you may at various points encourage to do that for you. So once you've done these tasks, these research tasks, and you have a potential list of influencers, I would then put them together in a simple outreach or nurturing list. So I would decide the ones I want, and I would put them together in a list. My personal view is I would keep that list short. I wouldn't have a huge list of 200 people of influencers, because personally I don't believe I can build relationships with that many people that easily. So what I do is I tend to use BuzzSumo to do this, but again you can use a spreadsheet, you can use tools like BuzzStream for this, for example. But I tend to put them into a list. So I might have 20 people who are in an influencer list that I have. And so I just have these people here on my list. So I've now shortlisted down. I would typically probably have no more than 20 people in a list, sometimes more. But on an active list, probably no more than 20 people, and often less. So I have my list. So what do I do with it? And to me, the really important thing, if you take nothing else away from my session today, the starting point for thinking about outreach at all is how can you help people? The starting point is not how can they help you. Your starting point has to be, can you help them? You only want people on your list, I believe, that you can help. because that's how you build a relationship. A relationship's a two-way thing. It's a bit of mutual give and take. And initially, I think you have to do most of the giving because you're building the relationship. You want the relationship, so you start with more of the giving. So the starting point for me is, how can you help your influencers? And so I would only want people on my list that I feel I have the capacity to help in some way. So how would you help them? Obviously, you can start doing things to help them by linking to their site. They may have a blog and you link to it. If you've got a high authority site, that's obviously even more valuable than if you have a low authority site, but you can start by linking to it, for example. You can simply recommend their services. You have an audience. If you respect that influencer and what they do, you can recommend their services. You can do that in a number of ways, of course, in terms of slides, in terms of webinars, in terms of on your website, in terms of through social media, but you can recommend their services to your audience. You could offer them free or discounted use of your services. So if you have a tool like we have BuzzSumo, certain influencers, we will give discounted or free access to a tool so they can use it, and hopefully in return they might say they like it. We would never ask for that, but hopefully if they like it, they would tell people they like using the tool. But you may have a range of different tools or services that you can make available if it's relevant to your influencer. I think another important thing is you can research and share insights before they're public. Influencers, particularly journalists, like to know stories in advance, really. So if you can share what's happening, so you may have some insights, and typically most people would have insights into what's happening in their particular marketplace that they could share, and that could be really valuable to the influencer to know some of those insights, and they would appreciate having stuff before it's public, particularly. You can also share and promote their content. So a lot of people do this. You would share their content on Twitter. You can promote their content, for example, because you've got to start with what's in it for them. And so, you know, analysts love getting data and insights. If you can help them with data and insights, that's good. Journalists love getting stories that fit with what they're doing. Maybe you have a really good case study of something and you can share it with them and they would like that. If it's just people who are peers in your industry, they like to build their reputation and exposure, and you can promote them. So the key is what's in it for them, how can you help them? And then you have to nurture the relationships. I use the BuzzSumo questions tool to do this. What this questions tool does effectively is I put people into my list, and then it shows me every question they ask on Twitter. I don't have to go to their Twitter accounts. It will simply show me every question they're asking. So Neil Schaefer there is social advertising killing social marketing, for example. And then I reply to those. So rather than just sharing content, I try to engage with them. If they share tips, I say, oh, that's really interesting, here's one that I've got. If they're asking questions, I try to engage and reply to questions. So it's not about sharing content for me. I use this tool to see what questions they're asking, and then I engage with them. But also, I would share their content. And the BuzzSumo influencer tool does exactly the same, really. If I put together a list of 20 people, it will show me every time they publish content. I don't need to go away to their individual blogs. It will show me every time they publish content. So I can see here something was published by Joe Paluzzi, for example, and then I can decide whether I want to share that or comment on it, for example. So the tool allows me to see what questions they're asking on Twitter and what content they're publishing. And whatever tool you use, I think they're important things to do to build your relationship. And then I think you can start to see why you can't have too many people in your list. It takes time to build that relationship. And I think the important thing is relationships take time. So you're tweeting and sharing their content, you're commenting on their blogs, and you're gradually building up a relationship over time. So it's not immediate. You might be actively helping them through your data and your case studies, for example. So you're just slowly helping them. I do think it's important to meet them at events if you can, if you've shared and you've talked to them. Even if it's simply at the end of a conference presentation, you just say, hi, Joe. Was really keen to meet you, love your stuff, whatever. A personal connection, I think, is really useful. If you can have a coffee, even better, but sometimes people are in big demand, but do meet them. If you've got a friend who knows them, seek a connection or an introduction through your connection. And only after you've built things, I think only after you've started to build a relationship, would you might ask to interview them for your website, for example. You wouldn't start there. It's like any relationship. You start somewhere else and you gradually build up the relationship. And then at the end of that, you might say, okay, would you like to do some joint content with me, or maybe you can do a joint webinar, which becomes joint content. But it's basically a process of building over time, and then you collaborate with that influencer, and that's the sort of the pinnacle, I think, of the relationship that you have then, because you're doing it jointly. But it takes time to build that. So I hope that's been helpful. So my summary of outreach and influencer marketing is map your landscape to start with. Who does your audience respect? Start with your audience. Who do they respect? I would identify the authors of heavily shared content. I'd identify the people that share and amplify content, and it's not always who you think it is. And I would include in that people who are the people sharing our content already. But find the ones that best fit your audience. It might be by location, it might be by authority, it might be by topic, for example. But find the ones that best fit your needs. Then create an outreach list of influencers that you can help, and that's important. You should only have on your list, I think, a list of influencers that you can help, and work out how can you help them, and then you work on that. You work on helping them. So don't put somebody on there you think, well, there's no way I can help them because my tool's not relevant to them, etc., etc. Just have the ones that you can help there. I would keep it to a small list, and then I would just say it takes time. It takes 6 months, a year. You just gradually build that relationship, and it pays dividends, but it takes time. So that's what's worked for us. I mean, I hope there's some insights there for you, and I hope there's been something you can take away there. But thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may have occurred during the session.
Thanks a million for that, Steve. Some fantastic tips there. This is Paul Cawley here from Learn Inbound in Dublin. And Steve, there's a ton of questions after coming through there during your session. So I'll start off with one of them. When it comes to balancing between informative content, so technical, actionable information, the type you just shared, versus the latest news and tips that are just breaking stuff that isn't such a deep dive, how would you suggest we can balance between those? And is there any tips on using tools like BuzzSumo to make informed decisions on that?
Okay, yeah, no, I think it's a good point, because I think if you're writing content, you always need a balance, I think. I do think you need some what I tend to call cornerstone content, which is quite authoritative, maybe more long-form content, maybe more data-driven or maybe research-based, which I think adds a sort of cornerstone content. And that tends to be content people might link to and come back to. It could be reference-style content. But in between, you can't keep writing that content. So in between, you've got a mix of other content, and that includes breaking news and stories. If you can be ahead of a trend, that's fantastic. But it can be quite difficult to be the first to break a story because lots of people are doing it. You can use tools. There are lots of tools out there. We have a BuzzSumo trending dashboard. You can set up a trending dashboard for any topic, and we'll show you the content that's most shared that's been published in the last 2 hours, for example. So you can see what's the most shared content in the last 2 hours. Is that something you want to share with your audience? But I think it's important to have a mix of content, because often those breaking news stories are things that people might share, but they're not necessarily things that people might link to. And I think you need a balance of content, content that people will share, content that people will link to. And people do tend to share and link for different reasons. So more authoritative reference style, longer form content tends to get more links often than the newsy, newsjacking sort of content. I also think you need different types of content because your users are in a buying cycle. So some users, you just may be raising awareness. So it may be a viral quiz is ideal for raising awareness, but it's not going to convert any of your customers. To do that, you're going to need something about the benefits of your services. You might want case studies, for example. So a buyer's going through that sort of buyer journey. You need content for different stages: awareness, provoking their interest, engaging them, conversion, and even content for keeping your customers and staying engaged with your customers over time. So I think it's just a question of balance there, but I would always have some cornerstone content because I think it's the sort of content people tend to link to more regularly.
Fantastic stuff. I was very interested, Steve. You mentioned a couple of times about the numbers on your outreach list and to keep them at small and manageable levels. You said, when you yourself are doing it, you keep your numbers to about 20. Is the restrictions on the numbers there, is that based on your time and your resource? Or anything like a Dunbar number?
Right. It's for me, it's just based on practicalities, really. If I'm trying to build relationships, I'm trying to see what they're sharing, I'm trying to find ways to help them. It's just a practical number for me about how many people can you do that with realistically. I just personally feel I can do it better if I've got 10 to 20 people I'm trying to work with at any one time, rather than if I have 50 people, for example. So the danger if you have 50 people is you're really trying to build a relationship with somebody, but you've completely forgotten about them for a week, etc. And you can have systems to provoke you to think about it, but I think there's a danger the more people you have that you don't do it as well. So for me personally, when we started BuzzSumo, we did come up with a list of 20 people. We did try to build relationships with them. I think we succeeded quite well with half of them, and that drove huge awareness for us. So it was probably more about the quality than the quantity. So I think for me, it's practical reasons. I just see some people I talk to say, oh, we've got these 200 people on our list, and I think, I'm not sure you're really building a relationship then with 200 people, because I think that's hard to do unless there are 20 of you and you're really taking 10 each. But for me personally, 10 to 20 feels a reasonable number.
I think even with the best CRM systems in the world, their own human limitations still put a cap on that one.
Yeah.
One of the interesting questions that came in, for the numbers in BuzzSumo, are they the raw share figures, or do you apply any filtering to the data to cut out spam accounts and automated accounts, or is that just the raw share figures? And if it is the raw numbers, is there any manual filtering a user can apply to get a more broken down figure on it?
Okay, yeah, no, first of the numbers that we show are the numbers from the various social networks APIs. So the various social networks give us the numbers for share, so they are the raw numbers. That said, we do a number of things. So we do have some algorithms to detect spam. So for example, we find this a lot, sometimes with Google Plus accounts, we'll find something that's had no shares on Twitter at all, but it's had 500,000 shares on Google Plus. That's suspicious to us, that nobody's bothered to share it on Facebook or Twitter, but suddenly there's 100,000 or however many thousand Google Plus shares. So we will often take those out. So we have an algorithm to detect things which look unusual. But otherwise, they are the raw figures. But there are things you can do. You can filter by network, so you could filter by the most shared on LinkedIn or filter by the most shared on Twitter if you're interested in particular networks. And obviously, you can even see who shared it, and you can see the tweets that they shared it with, so you can go back to sort of source that way. But no, the numbers are the raw numbers. What I would say is they're not live, so we tend to update content a lot over the first sort of week. So when it's first published, we tend to find it gets most shares over that period. And then periodically we update it, again based on an algorithm. If it's getting lots of shares, we update it more frequently. If an article's only had 4 shares after a month, we might only update that monthly, for example, because we think most people are interested in the most shared content. So the less shares it has, the less frequently we tend to update. But none of our numbers are live. They might be from yesterday or even a week ago, depending on the content. But they are the raw numbers.
Oh, fantastic stuff again. And you briefly mentioned there one of the metrics you look at is the retweet numbers that the people, the outreach list you're building, how many retweets they're getting on average. Is there any other metrics you look at there? I know dealing with clients and talking with people, they still tend to just look at the follower count. So if we can start to push those other metrics, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, for me personally, I think the retweet numbers are important because it shows it gives you a concrete measure of whether people are engaging with the content. Now, it could be that people are reading the tweets anyway, but not deciding to retweet, so that they may be getting quite a lot of views. There were some interesting stats come out this week, actually. I think it was on Forbes, saying that a lot of people just don't click on links in tweets anyway. And so what I look for is just that degree of engagement. So I would also look at things like reply ratios to see if they're talking to their audience and how engaged they are with their audience. I think follower numbers can be a bit of a vanity metric. I mean, if you're just trying to build awareness, maybe getting somebody with hundreds of thousands of followers to share it, maybe people see it. Although I don't know about you, how often you look at your home feeds on Twitter. I think increasingly people don't. I mean, I tend to filter it using BuzzSumo, so I can see all the questions my influencers are asking, but I do it via the BuzzSumo tool, not via Twitter, for example, or I might use Twitter lists. So I'm not sure how much people see those the main Twitter streams, if I'm honest, because people retweet so much that there is a danger that Twitter feeds become just a lot of spammy links. And personally, I get aggrieved about it sometimes. If I was Twitter, I'd actually say you can only share a link once, or you can only share a link twice a month, or something like that, because people do share it. It's become accepted best practice to share a link multiple times because your audience are online at different times, they don't see it, etc. But the danger with that is there's just a lot of spammy links and people then don't click through as much. But just looking at numbers of followers, I can tell you I've looked at the data again and again, and in some areas it might be the case that a big influencer has obviously got a higher retweet rate. But the retweet rate for me is the key figure. It's not the numbers of followers, just my measure of engagement. But for some people, I know they want reach, and therefore you would look at people with large numbers. I would also look at things like their domain authority. So on our analysis, you'll see if you do a search, we show you their domain authority. that's important to me as well, because I'm looking for people who are authorities in their space. So I try to build relationships with people who've got a high domain authority and a high retweet rate, probably before I look at the numbers of followers.